Today, we're going to talk about something that presents its own set of challenges, and that is painting water and reflections. Okay, today we're going to do a quick painting that is going to teach you how to paint water. So water can be a little bit tricky. We're looking at layers of positive and negative shapes here. And so I thought I'd just go ahead and paint this scene. But the focus of today's painting is going to be about the water and the reflections here. All right, so what I'm going to do first is wet down both sides of my paper. So it's a very simple drawing, just a few shapes. I mainly wanted to remember where the boat is going to be and some of those reflections. I've kind of cut around this boat a little bit because I'm going to try to leave that just the white of the paper. Okay, and what I'm going to do first is lay in a quick sky. I'm not worried about the sky a whole lot. This painting is not about the sky. So I can really do anything I want with that. I'm coming down to about the horizon line there. I'm going to go back in, leave a little area for some clouds. And just a little thicker paint towards the top of the sky. Now the only thing I'm worried about cutting around is this boat right here. So I don't have to worry about a whole lot as I bring this wash down. I can even go over that shadow side of my boat, and I'm going to leave a few gaps here for some bright reflections on the water. Okay, and as I'm coming down the page here to the bottom, I'm continually adding more paint into this mixture. That's part of what makes our water look believable, is if you darken it up in the foreground, that really helps. And I can take some of the darker paint and add a few little waves in the part that I've already gone over. And don't be afraid to use a lot of paint. It's okay to really kind of darken up that foreground. So I'm going to go up to where this edge is still damp with this boat. I want to soften some of the edges of this reflection. It could be a harder edge right by the boat, but as it moves away, I want it to soften up a little bit. Now you can see in the reference photo there's some ripples in the water that are a little bit darker. So those ripples are bigger in the foreground and smaller in the distance. So even in this point in the painting, we still want to be thinking about perspective a little bit in that sense. They're larger and less of them up front, and more and smaller as they move into the distance. So as we get further into this middle ground, there's more of these little ripples, and they're smaller, but there's more of them, and they're closer together. Looks a little weak back here. I'm going to add a few of these ripples just to strengthen up that part of the water a little bit. All right, and before this dries up back here, I'm going to take a different brush I want some brighter greens of that grass that's behind our little boat here. And same thing as before, this is all going to fade and dry a little lighter. So compensate for that. Paint just a little darker than you think it needs to be. And I'll be going over these trees once again. Okay, and in this stage of the painting, are there any of these soft green colors that I want to be involved in a reflection? I can add in some of this green that goes below the shoreline here. Just bring that down to create some reflections. Again, this is going to be the green that's kind of left behind when I come over with a darker wash, so I don't need to obsess over it, but it's kind of helpful to have it there. And as I look at the trees off in the distance, I can mix in some of this green with these blues that I already have on my palette. So as we get further back in the painting, we want to cool it down to give it a sense of distance. But the difference in value and the difference in temperature is bringing these trees closer to us and giving us a sense of distance. Okay, at this stage of the painting, I'm going to let the painting dry, and then I'll come back in, start paying attention to these trees, and we'll get into some of these reflections down here. Okay, now that my paper has had a chance to dry, I'm going to move into some of my middle values. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the hills back here and these trees. The focus of this practice is what's happening right around here with these waves. But I'll go ahead and add a little more detail so we can get a sense of how all of this works together. So I'm going from left to right, adding a little more strength in this tree area. Suggesting a couple boats back here. And I'm going to warm up this green color. Some raw sienna, some burnt or raw umber, some more cobalt turquoise. That's kind of what I like to use for my greens that I mix. And I'm going to move into this tree shape. While this is still damp, I'm going to connect a shadow shape to the base of it. And while the trees themselves are still damp, I'm going to take some cobalt blue and some neutral tint and just give a few suggestions of some shadows. And then I get to the large reflection shape. And let's just start here. This kind of shadow on the shoreline is going to connect right in to these reflections. Before I do that, I want to maybe add a taller tree there. Everything's kind of the same height, and it's kind of bugging me. Let's break that up a little bit. That's fine. Okay, let me move in to these reflections. Now, when you're making these reflections, make sure that you're making them horizontal lines. You don't want them to be too slanted, especially far away as these distant reflections are. And I'm lining up these reflections with where some of these trees are. And this is a thicker, you want to use thicker paint here. You want to reload your brush often. And as my reflection gets up to the edge of this boat, I'm going to take a small synthetic brush with some neutral tint, and I want to get that shadow side of the boat in while this is damp so it can connect right into these darker reflections. And bring the edge of the boat down to there. And I'm going to connect it to this reflection. So these dark lines of this reflection need to line up with the edge of this tree here, because that's the cause of the reflection. And I can bring these lines up right up to where the boat's brighter reflection starts. And as we work closer to the foreground, these reflections are further apart from each other. We're doing the same thing on this side. Kind of cutting around part of this. And then at some point the lines break through and go all the way across. It's important to keep lined up with this tree here still. I want this reflection to be above this riplet. It's like the opposite side of the wave that's reflecting these trees back here. So I can do that right here. And I'm just doing some dry brush marks there. And one more there. And I can kind of connect these with some other dry brush marks. And you want to find that balance between putting in enough of these waves and not doing too much. So there's some reflection over here from this tree as well. Remember, keep those lines horizontal. And there's more of them in the distance. And then there's more gaps as it gets closer to you and more spread out. There's a few little riplets that stretch across the entire painting, and in order to get those, I'm just kind of dry brushing some marks. I'm just going to go ahead and connect those. That makes a little more sense to me. Now I want to show the bottom of the boat here. I like leaving a little gap where the boat and the reflection kind of connect. I'm going to add a few marks of detail to our boat. I can add in this reflection of this mast. So the last thing I want to do is I feel like the foreground might need just a little bit more texture, a little bit more strength to draw the viewer into the painting. Just some big, bold brush marks. You can take some gouache and you can add in a few highlights on some boats over here. And the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take a damp brush. There's a few reflections for some of these trees. So I'm going to follow that straight down. I think that really helps to complete the illusion of water and reflections. So it's just a little thing, but I feel like it can make a big difference. I hope that you found this demo helpful and that you feel more confident when it comes to painting water and reflections. And I wanted to mention, if you haven't seen my free video lesson, 8 tips to avoid overworking your painting, take a look at it. You can follow the link below, or you can get to it in my bio on Instagram. I've gotten some great feedback from this video lesson, and it's been very helpful to solve a big problem that I have had to deal with, and that is overworking your painting. So check out my free video lesson, and I'll see you next time.